In this episode, we are going to talk about inefficient price delivery, which is also called imbalance in price. I will explain how to use these imbalances in your trading, so let's get into it. So first of all, let me clearly explain what I actually mean by unfilled PD arrays, because a lot of people get confused at this point. Unfilled PD arrays are simply those PD arrays in a given range that price has not filled, rebalanced, or tapped into after they were formed. When I say the initial stage, I am specifically talking about the phase right after a liquidity sweep, or from the point where a new trend actually starts. At that stage, price usually leaves behind certain PD arrays that remain untouched. Now, it's important to understand this. Not all PD arrays are equally important. The PD arrays that form in the middle of the range are usually not very significant. We don't need to focus much on those. What really matters are the PD arrays that form at the most extreme discount or most extreme premium of the range. Those extreme areas are where unfilled PD arrays carry the most value. These are the areas where price is most likely to react, reverse, or at least pause. That is why unfilled PD arrays located near the highs and lows of a range matter the most. Now, there are two main ways you can use these unfilled PD arrays in your trading, and both of them are very powerful when used correctly. First, you can use unfilled PD arrays as entry locations. Second, you can use unfilled PD arrays as targets, meaning areas where you take profits or partially exit trades. Using them this way can help you avoid a lot of unnecessary losses, and at the same time, it can help you find better quality trade opportunities with more consistent results. Now let me make something very clear. Unfilled PD arrays can be anything, depending on the entry model you use. It can be a fair value gap. It can be an inverse fair value gap. It can be an order block. It can be a breaker block. Any PD array that forms in price does not rebalance or mitigate immediately can be considered an unfilled PD array. You can think of these as breakaway areas where price moved with strength and never came back to rebalance. These unfilled PD arrays can later be used either as entry points or as targets, but there is one rule that never changes. There must always be a reason. Without context, nothing works. You need to understand why you are taking a trade from that PD array or why you are targeting that PD array. And don't worry, I'm going to explain all of this clearly in the next few minutes. But before we move into executions and examples, the first thing we need to understand is how these unfilled PD arrays actually form, because once you understand that, everything else becomes much easier. So basically, I don't want to make this complicated for you at all. This explanation is going to be very beginner-friendly. If you are a beginner and you are struggling with targets or entry points, this is going to help you a lot in many different ways. So just trust me on this part. Now let me show you how unfilled PD arrays actually form and how we are going to use these unfilled fair value gaps. First, I want to explain this using a simple diagram-style explanation so you can clearly understand how to identify whether there is an unfilled PD array that we can actually use. Let's start from the beginning. Suppose we have a sell-side liquidity sweep, or any situation where price reacts strongly. The reason itself does not matter. From that point, price will form a swing low and then a swing high, or a swing high and then a swing low. We only care about identifying a clear swing high and a clear swing low, nothing more than that. Once we have that, the next thing we need to identify is whether the leg is bullish or bearish. What I mean by that is simply to see where price started from. If price started from a lower point and moved upward, then the leg is bullish. If price started from a higher point and moved downward, then the leg is bearish. This part is very important because it matters when we are choosing which PD arrays to focus on. If price started from the bottom and moved upward, then we are only interested in PD arrays that are located in the most extreme discount. It does not matter which time frame these PD arrays are on because price is fractal. A PD array on a lower time frame can work the same way as one on a higher time frame. And as I have already told you before, a PD array can be anything. It can be a fair value gap, It can be an inverse fair value gap, it can be an order block, or it can be a breaker block. The only rule that matters is that the PD array must be unfilled. If that PD array has been filled even by one candle or one wick, then the whole idea of it being an unfilled PD array is destroyed and we do not use it. Now let's talk about how these unfilled PD arrays actually form. Most of the time, they form at the very beginning of a leg, or you can say at the start of a trend. Sometimes price forms multiple PD arrays close to each other. Price may come back and fill some of them, but it often leaves one or two PD arrays unfilled. Those remaining unfilled PD arrays are the ones we are interested in. According to this diagram example, we first have a sell-side liquidity sweep. After that, price gives us a market structure shift or some form of entry confirmation. During this move, price leaves behind a fair value gap and an order block that remain unfilled. At this stage, we do not do anything yet. We wait and allow price to continue and form the high of the leg. Now you can see that price has formed a high, and in this example it has also swept a high. Once that happens, we go back and mark the unfilled fair value gaps and unfilled order blocks that were left behind earlier. These are now our unfilled PD arrays. This is how unfilled PD arrays are formed, and how you choose which ones actually matter. Now that buy-side liquidity has been swept, let me explain how we are going to use these unfilled PD arrays. Suppose you plan an entry from the buy-side liquidity and you are planning a short trade. You align your bias, you plan your entry, everything makes sense. At the time of targeting, instead of randomly targeting swing lows, I want you to target those unfilled PD arrays. Those unfilled PD arrays become your primary targets. And when price eventually comes back into those unfilled PD arrays, you can also use them as potential entry locations for your next trade, if the context supports it. This is how you are going to use unfilled PD arrays, both as targets and as entry points. Now that you understand the idea behind this, let me show you how you are actually going to use these unfilled PD arrays on the charts, so everything becomes clear and practical. Let me show you an example of how this works when we are using unfilled PD arrays for targeting. This is nothing new. I have been saying this for a long time, that instead of targeting opposing side liquidity, you should focus more on targeting unfilled PD arrays. As I've already told you before, you can plan your entry however you want. The entry model does not matter as much here. What matters is how you manage your targets. If we look at this example, you can see that we first have a buy-side liquidity sweep. After price sweeps the buy-side liquidity, price manipulates the early sellers who entered near this high. Once that manipulation happens, we can then plan our entry in whatever way we are comfortable with. In this case, I personally like to trade using inverse fair value gaps. So here, I place my order at the inverse fair value gap and keep my stop loss above the high. Now let's talk about targets. If you look lower on the chart, you can see that we have multiple unfilled PD arrays sitting in discount. We have an inverse fair value gap, we have a normal fair value gap, and we also have two order blocks. In situations like this, it is very common to get confused about where exactly to place your target. When you have multiple unfilled PD arrays stacked together, the easiest and safest approach is to target the one that sits somewhere in the middle. In this example, we have an order block sitting in the middle of these PD arrays, so that becomes a very comfortable and logical target. Now let's see how price reacts. You can see how cleanly price moves straight into our target. You can also notice how price starts giving clear rejection as it enters these unfilled PD arrays. This shows you how sensitive price becomes once it starts filling inefficiencies. Now, after price fills this order block, there is still one fair value gap below that remains unfilled. At the same time, price has already started giving us reversal signals from the order block it just filled. When something like this happens on your chart, I would strongly suggest that you do not rush into taking another trade immediately. Instead, it is better to wait and see whether price wants to continue and fill the remaining fair value gap or not. You never want to force a trade. In this specific example, I am confident that price will not fill that remaining fair value gap, but explaining why would take too much time here, and I'll cover that in another video. For now, let's focus on taking trades from unfilled PD arrays. You can see that price rejects strongly from this order block and starts giving displacement to the upside along with an inverse structure. Once you see this type of reaction, you can comfortably look for a trade anywhere after that rejection. Your entry does not have to be perfect. You just need to align with the reaction. Now, for targets on this trade, we can look above and target any of the unfilled fair value gaps sitting in premium. And as you can see, price moves very cleanly and goes straight into our target. If there are more unfilled PD arrays above, you can also continue targeting those, because price will eventually look to fill unfilled PD arrays if the market is moving efficiently. This is how you use unfilled PD arrays both for targeting and for taking trades, without overcomplicating anything. I hope this example helped you clearly understand how unfilled PD arrays actually work, and how you can use them properly in your trading. You don't need to overcomplicate this. Focus on context, focus on where price is inefficient, and let the market come to those areas. Unfilled PD arrays are not magic, but when you understand why they form and how price reacts to them, they can give you very clean targets and high-quality trade opportunities. Be patient, don't force trades, and always let price show you intent first. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to connect with me, you can join my Telegram and Discord. The links are in the description. And if you want to learn personally from me, you can check out the mentorship program. The link is also in the description. I've also left discount codes for funded accounts down there if you're interested. That's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.